Welcome to the new season of the Live Your Spa Life show. The SPA in Spa Life stands for Seek Power Always, that divine power within you to do what you're here to do. The theme for this season is intentional living. Amazing people like you share ways to live by design and with purpose to ensure that this short ride of life occurs with choice, physically, financially, spiritually, and in your relationships to create a world-class life. In these times of uncertainty, it's time for you to move past the distractions and start trusting yourself more through your God-giving knowingness. No one truly knows better what's best for you than you. In this season, you'll have plenty of examples of people choosing their best life and creating a positive impact through intentional living. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us and being part of the Live Your Spa Life conversation. With us today is Gayle Lantz, founder of WorkMatters, Inc. She is a leadership expert, author, speaker, and trailblazer in her field who helps CEOs and executives shape corporate culture and inspire change. For over 20 years, she has worked with organizations and executives who want to make a positive difference in the lives of those they lead and serve. She is author of the award-winning book, Take the Bull by the Horns, and creator of the Leadership Journal. Her podcast, CEO on the Go, is ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally. It's designed to help inspire leaders who like to learn on the go. Gayle, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Diane. Good to be here.
Well, I want to just jump in here about what kind of leader you are. And one of the things I think is a bit of an oxymoron is that you are known as the gentle disruptor. And I don't necessarily think of disruption as being in any way gentle. So tell me a little bit about how that works.
Well, I think it can be. And I think a lot of it just has to do with my style and my personality. I tend to be more introverted and quiet, and I like to help people think. And I think that oftentimes change has to begin with your mindset. And that's something that you can't force. It can't be something that is overly difficult. It takes some time. So I think being able to have some gentle approaches to disruption is what's needed right now. People have been through so much disruption already. It's so hard for them. So I do think it's possible with the right line of questioning and mindset to really handle disruption well and come out the other side to leverage it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that mindset is such a key component. And one of the things that you talk about is thinking in chaos. And I can think of nothing more chaotic than the last several years. And, about how change is always constant. How do you help kind of lead people through that idea of kind of working through the storm?
First is to help kind of diagnose where they are in it, because some people just know that they've been kind of shaken up, so to speak, and to really understand where are we right now in terms of what's possible and where we want to go. So being able to anticipate change, being able to design change, and then ultimately execute change is where you want to be. So the starting point is really beginning to help people see change is not going away. So how can you leverage it and anticipate it better to make the most of it?
One of the things that you and I are both a fan of is getting outside in nature. And you talk about having some reflective questions and being able to kind of walk through, whether it's changes or things that you want to look at. How do you utilize nature as a way to be reflective and to be able to ask yourself a different question?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been studying biomimicry lately. So there's a lot in nature, I think, that is there to teach us. But in terms of my own practice, I just love being outdoors and being inspired by nature because I think that it's a reminder that things do happen with ease and in their own time. And so many times, especially in organizational life, we're trying to force things, put people through systems, impose processes. And there's a lot that I think can happen more organically when we allow that to happen. And just being out in nature is a reminder of that. There is so much beauty there. It tends to be calming to me too, which I appreciate. So just as a side benefit, just being out there and just being reminded of what a beautiful world we live in brings good things back into my work.
I love that. Whether it's been a reflection of, the last couple of years, there's been a lot of fears and people second guessing themselves. What are some of the fears that you see executives are experiencing?
Well, fear of change is one of them, or they're exhausted by change, but a lot of them are really afraid. They've built a business of success. They see that things need to be different. They don't necessarily know how to move through change in the most constructive way. So there's a little fear of that. I think some of them are afraid for their own reputations. There's a lot at stake when you're in a top leadership role. People are looking to you to have answers and solutions. So, people are concerned about making the wrong decision. How do I get out of this situation that's so difficult and make everyone happy? So I think there are a lot of different kinds of fears. Fear of letting people down. What if I decide to lay off some people, or what if I need to change the structure of how we're running things? How will that impact people? So some of those there's so many different kinds of fears, but those are the tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
Right. And so what are some of the tools that you use to move through, for yourself? I mean, do you talk through with other people? Do you have certain tools that you implement that allows you to kind of get past those things?
Yeah, I think having conversations is one of the best things that you can do with your peers. I run some CEO and senior executive peer groups, so I'm a huge advocate of being able to leverage your network and a small group dynamic to address some of those issues. I also like to journal. As I mentioned, I'm a bit reflective just in terms of my personality style. So being able to sit down and reflect on questions like what really matters now, what could be possible, what am I learning? What's something new that I might try? Those are the kinds of questions that help focus me and my clients more on the future, as opposed to what's not happening now. How do we handle this crisis of the day? So it's a little different orientation to be more future focused.
Got it. You've talked before about this being a tough time to lead. How does resilience come into play?
Well, resilience is everything. To me, resilience is the new leadership skill. If leaders can develop better ways to increase their resilience, it helps everyone involved. And that means being able to bounce back more quickly, be receptive to feedback, looking at challenges and problems as learning opportunities, growth opportunities. So there are actually assessments that we offer that can help a leader determine how resilient they are. It's one of 25 skills that we look at. So it is something that can be developed over time.
Of those 25, what do you think are some of the key ones that would be good for leaders to develop in order to help increase their resiliency?
I think one of them would be futuristic thinking, to be able to, like I said, to focus more on the future as opposed to the past or what's not working. It's not necessarily a skill set, but more of a mindset of optimism, that believing that things are always working out, that this is happening for a reason, that I can trust this process, that this is temporary. So I don't know if it's not directly answering your question, but talking more about how people can begin thinking about it to help them.
Right. Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think sometimes when you're actually in a situation and it can feel actually very closed, right? And so when you
Mhm.
ask yourself some of those open-minded questions, kind of that outside the box, who do you have in your court, your inner court, whether that is a coach or a consultant that you can bounce ideas on? Because I think one of the things I've found, and especially with leaders that I work with, is that when they're thinking within themselves, especially if there's time limits or stress or things that are happening, it can feel very closed in and you don't
Mhm.
necessarily look at a different option, right? Because you kind of like going with the same thing. But then as you talk about being constant, to be able to constantly be able to look outside that box, do you find that having kind of a trusted source to be able to bounce some of those things off is helpful for the leader in those situations?
Yes, I serve as that trusted source or advisor. I also reach out to people on my own who I consider to be my trusted advisors. And I think, one of the key things that you would want to come from that conversation, ideally, it's going back to the question about what skills should you develop. Um, it's being able to reframe the situation. So I think of reframing almost as a leadership skill, being able to see a problem and to look at it differently, to say, this isn't the problem that we think it is. This is the opportunity that's really queuing us up for something that we know could be even bigger and better. So working with a thought partner, strategic thinking partner, a peer, someone outside of yourself can often help you gain that outside perspective that you might be missing if you're just so caught up in the problem. So being able to reframe that situation is really critical.
Got it. Well, I know for our listeners, they really appreciate the journey, right? So, things that, times that you were maybe out of alignment or feeling disempowered or things that aren't working, I
Mhm.
think are some of our best teachers. So can you share a little bit about some times that you felt either out of alignment or kind of out of your power?
Diane, how much time do we have on this podcast? That could be like a series of different episodes. Those are kind of what the episodes are on my own podcast, all the lessons I've learned. I think some of the most notable times when I've been out of alignment was when I was in the corporate world and felt like I had achieved some level of success or had been able to do what I needed to do in that role. But it had over time, it did not feel congruent with who I was, even with what my values were, with where I thought that I wanted to go, even though at the time I didn't know where exactly I wanted to go. I just know I need this to stop. I need an out. I need something to change because it really did not feel like it was authentic to who I was. I felt like I was getting really good at conforming
Mm.
to what I needed to do to be effective in my role. And at some point, I really felt like I was plateauing. And, the inevitable question that so many people, I'm sure your listeners ask, like, is this all there is? Is there something else out there? So that's a question that I had to grapple with. And I think if or when, it's probably a when, not an if, you get to that point where you do feel like you're out of alignment, going back to reframing, it's like, aha, this is the moment. This is exactly what needs to happen to catapult me into a different level of thinking, perhaps with different people that I meet, different opportunities that will appear, different situations. So the corporate world eventually was something that really made me feel like I was out of alignment in terms of what I wanted to do. And even in my own business, I've been in business over 20 years. I've had different iterations in my own entrepreneurial journey. And I get to points where I feel like, okay, I've done enough of that right now. I don't really feel like that's aligning with who I am now and where I want to go. So I
Mhm.
think it's possible to feel like you have some sense of alignment until you see these clear signs. It could be emotions, feelings, it's kind of the sensing that you have that something is just off.
Right.
But that it can really be a blessing. I've learned to view it that way instead of, why did I allow myself to do this for so long? Or how could I not have seen this sooner? To trust that everything is happening at just the right moment, for just the right reason, kind of like what you said before we jumped on the podcast,
Mhm.
everything's working out.
Right. I think it's kind of an interesting, I'm noticing that a lot of when people have been in their business and they've had a certain level of success, and particularly, I think there's this sweet spot between like 15 and 30 years in business, and you definitely hit a level of success, but I think that there's sometimes some uh internal questions like, is this it? Is this what I'm meant to do? Is this like, is there a different iteration? And even some are to the point where they just want to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and be like, maybe I just want to start something over. What are some of the distinctions that you utilize for yourself and also for your clients to really kind of break down and go, is this just a growing pain, or is it time to really pivot and do something different?
Yeah, I guess a lot depends on the magnitude of the feeling or the emotion. But what I usually try to do is look at certain elements, like break it down to be to be a little bit analytical. I might say, what are the aspects of the work that I do now that I enjoy the most, that I feel like are natural to me, that fill me up, where I feel like I'm making an impact? How can I carry more of that forward? So I think in terms of my thinking process, that's some of what I go through when I hit those times when it's like, what else is out there? What do I need to do or think about? Is to not feel like you have to come up with the answer to that. And that's really hard because problem, we need a solution. Question, we want an answer. But it's really an invitation when you hit those kind of roadblocks or kind of junctures in your life and your work when you're not sure what's next, is to just say, what is the next step? And to be willing to let things unfold and to not have everything figured out. That's been a huge lesson. And I may be off on a rabbit trail in our conversation, but to trust that it's okay if you don't have all the answers,
Mm-hmm.
and get excited about what's unfolding for you, what this journey is about to introduce to you, to
Right.
be surprised and delighted along the way instead of wasting so much energy trying so hard to use your analytical mind to make sense of things and figure out that perfect next step for you. Just take a
Right.
step. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by Clement Watt, which is take the first step, no more, no less, and the next step will be revealed. And I
Yep.
think as, business owners, as entrepreneurs, and just leaders in general, sometimes we feel like we want to see the whole picture. And oftentimes we're told, check out your vision, start with the end in mind and all of those things. But a lot of times that doesn't take into account the nuances that happen along the way and those pivots and those, the blind spots and the things that we maybe couldn't have projected or seen. But, to be able to kind of just be in it and be willing to be working through the uncomfortableness of it, to be able to actually have some perspective. So I think that it's important that, when you're in the journey, that you may not have all the answers in that. And so, if we look at kind of beyond the struggles and beyond, any of the challenges, what were some of the signs or things that you realized, like, you know what, I'm in alignment right now. I'm standing in my power. This is working. Can you think of some things that, showed up for yourself where you're like, this is me in my sweet spot?
Yeah, I guess maybe my podcast is an example of that. I started that purely as speaking of not knowing how things would turn out. I did it as an experiment, just trying to create more value for my market, and launched it during the pandemic. And then what I'm finding is it creates a great creative outlet for me. I need a creative outlet, and I feel like there's a lot that I can share that is helpful to leaders who want to learn and grow. So I just started doing these little short episodes, like 10 or 15 minutes, and really felt like it came fairly easily to me because there's a lot that I do want to share. So I feel like the podcast is actually an example of something that I've done that seems to be a pretty good fit for me and in alignment with who I am, what I care about, the impact I want to make. I really do want to make my business is WorkMatters. I want to do work that is purposeful and that is, making a positive impact. So that's my experiment that I think is continuing to check a lot of boxes for me in terms of alignment.
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of, creating, I mean, when we create our spaces that actually influence us in a big way, because we live life differently, like in our kitchen or our bathroom or our bedroom, there's so many different spaces in our home that either inspire us or take energy away. So what's your favorite room in your home and why?
Oh gosh, my home is a wreck. I wish I had more kind of clear space in my home. So I would have to say probably the best space is out on the deck. Again, going back to nature, where I feel like I can think better out there. Um, and just have kind of more clear mindedness. So I don't know that I have any special room in the house. I really like getting outside.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, the porch counts, right? I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So what's one thing that people are surprised to learn about you?
Hmm. I don't know. Sometimes they're surprised that I do kind of consider myself to be more introverted because they see me talking or do speaking and things like that. Um, Sometimes they're surprised to learn some of the crazy things that I do kind of physically. And I'm a huge believer, connection, mind, body, spirit. Like I've learned how to walk on my hands within the past couple of years, which is no easy task. I like to do difficult things. I love lifting in the gym, heavy weights, barbells, all of that, Olympic lifting. So a lot of times people, I think, are a little surprised at some of the things that I do along those lines that would be considered a little more out of the norm for people, other people like me. But I do like a challenge. And I think, going back to what helps you move through change and fear, really doing something that can challenge your mind, body, and spirit is one of the best things you can do.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that is one of the things that kind of took people out of the game when they were, doing some self-isolation, is that I think people forgot that we need to connect with other people. We need to move our body, right? It wasn't about,
Mhm.
sitting on the couch for 2 years. It was like, what ways can you, and if that was your reality, then, having that reminder of, we got to move our body, right? That stimulates our brain. And when we move and the experience of being in nature, like all of these things feed our spirit. It's just, when you start looking at all of those connections together, that we are such an interdynamic being. And when we
Exactly.
utilize all of those different things, it really does make a difference for us.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got to work on all of them. They all affect each other, just like you said.
Yeah,
So,
so good. So what's giving you hope right now?
gosh, what's giving me hope is the impact that I think I can make helping more leaders move through change. And for me also to look at the next iteration of my business and how I'm positioning the work that I do. Um, so I think that more leaders, enlightened leaders, are to the point where they're saying, I want to step into more of who I am, which is kind of the point of your podcast too, I think, right? Being authentic, bringing more of your authentic self
Mm-hmm.
into your work. And so I'm optimistic that they're seeing that what they've tried in the past may not have worked because it just wasn't the right approach for them. That going forward, everybody can create their own way of making progress based on who they are, what matters to them. There's not a cookie cutter approach. So I love seeing more leaders being open to different ways to help them grow and learn, and for me to be a catalyst in that process is one of the most fulfilling things that I can do.
Yeah. I find this to be interesting in that, so many times just in the past, people would have really clear distinctions of their personal life and their business life, and then that was encouraged. And I think we're seeing now more than ever, and maybe this is part of the hybrid of people working from home and having a lot more overlap in those areas. So what do you see is that line, or how do people kind of maneuver that of jumping back and forth in that? Because some people say, well, if you're sharing too much of your personal life, then it's not professional. And then it's like, how is it that you live your life? But then, all the other aspects of it. How do you help people kind of manage what is that kind of sweet spot for them in terms of, one, having boundaries, but two, being able to be authentic and sharing themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is kind of difficult to manage. I see a lot of leaders experimenting. Some are overstepping into territory. They need to don't share that much. Others need to be more, be more forthcoming about some of the personal issues that they're dealing with. So I think, what leaders can do is practice being more of who they are, worrying less about what people think, really having the right intention and spirit to affect people in a positive way. I wouldn't get so caught up in looking at, the exact line, like don't cross over this or that, and instead trust that everyone's creating new ways of moving forward. You can do that collectively too, to be open and saying, we're going to have a meeting. We're going to talk about some of the personal things going on. I just led a meeting before this podcast, and I was asking people to anticipate what's going on in their personal life that might be an obstacle or a barrier coming up over the next few months that could possibly threaten the business results that they're trying to get. It's something that leaders don't often think about that or talk about it. And it was really good for the conversation that this team had to become more intentional about how they're looking at where their personal life supports or can, be in the way of what they're trying to achieve in the business.
Right.
So I really encourage leaders to create a space where more open dialogue can happen, where people can figure this out together, to not feel like there's this right or wrong, but that we're just coming together in new ways to figure out what works best for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that was just such a big aha when, people a lot of times want to say things are right or wrong, good or bad, but when you start asking the question, is it working? Right.
Mm-hmm,
And so
mm-hmm.
just asking that, you can start looking at, it doesn't matter those other things. It's like, what's working for you, what's working for your team, for your clients. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when you look at all of that, it may be the same or it may be different, but being able to ask some of those deeper questions, then you can start asking and evaluating some more innovative ways to actually move in those directions.
Yeah, I think the more people can share what they deeply care about, who they are, the better outcomes you'll get in work too, and in your life. It just makes sense. So the more you feel like you have to put on a mask or be someone that you're not, or force fit yourself into the 17-part leadership model that your company says you have to do, it's really about deciding how you want to lead and how you want to go about living your life and your work in the best way.
Right, absolutely. I think it's sometimes interesting, like what we want our impact to be, what we think that we're doing in the world. It's always interesting to get somebody else's perspective on that. And so, for instance, like, what does your either like your parents or your family, what do they think you do?
That's such a good question. My mother has no idea. She just knows that every now and then she might see me in the news or an article that I've written or the book that I've written. My kids, they say a lot of times, I don't know how to tell people what you do. So what I tell them is just, say that your mom really likes helping leaders get better at what they do to help their team and their organizations, something like that. So, and you know what, I'm actually to a point where I feel like I don't even have the right answer. I'm a combination of a lot of things, consultant, coach, speaker, author. So, one term that I heard another expert share recently is that we're all slash people, consultant slash coach slash author slash trainer slash whatever. Right. And so I've worried less about what people call me or how they characterize me, and just try to focus more on the problems that I can solve, the people who I feel like I can help, and having more of those conversations.
So great.
That's where I am at the moment.
I started asking that because, when I was a police officer, that was like, it was a tidy title and that was great. And then when I worked undercover, especially as a prostitute, when I was hunting a serial killer, it's like, how do I even explain, that aspect of it? And then now, really looking into the coaching consulting aspect of it, I just find it's funny because, I'll find that my dad will like post on my social media and say, there's Diane doing that thing that she does.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. So I really have had to care a lot less. It bothered me a lot earlier, I have to admit, I want to be known as this, but now I've changed so much in the process. I wouldn't expect anyone to really understand how to, clearly peg me as any one thing. Right. And that's okay. And I'm continuing to evolve. So
nice. So what's a funny story that either your family or your close friends would share about you?
Oh gosh, a funny story. Well, I'm not a very good cook. And so there are a lot of stories that they could share about stuff I've done to almost blow up my kitchen in the house with the kids. One of the most famous stories is when my kids brought home friendship bread that you're supposed to take, like get the bread, share it, make loaves of bread, share it with your friends and all of that. And my kids brought home the batter that I was supposed to make the bread with. And long story short, I ended up catching the oven on fire. So needless to say, they didn't have any friendship bread to share, just little charred blobs, which is classic for me. It's just one of those things I've never been very good at, and I'm okay with that. People give me cookbooks every year. Doesn't matter. I'm not like, I'm focusing on walking on my hands and going on nature walks and things like that. So, so they always kid me about how bad I am in the kitchen. So
I love it. It's so fun. Well, I know that our listeners are going to want to stay in contact with you. How can they best do that?
Best way might be by LinkedIn. Gayle Lantz on LinkedIn. Lantz is the last name. And then workmatters.com is another main site. And then, of course, the podcast, CEO on the Go podcast.com would be another way to follow my work and to be in touch that way. I'd love to hear from you or any feedback that anyone wants to share as I continue to crank out more content to try to help people in my market.
Perfect. I love that. Well, as you know, our theme for this season is intentional living. So in what way are you living an intentional life today?
I'm living an intentional life in so many ways. And I think it's really trying to take charge of every day, setting myself in the right mindset from the start to the extent that I can. I don't do it every day, but being intentional about the impact that I want to make. And to your point, trying to stay in alignment as much as possible. I think that that's the key. So whether that's meditating, going on a quick run in the morning, listening to some music, whatever's uplifting to start your day that way is my intention to try to stay in that state as long as possible so that I can be my best for everyone else.
So great. I love it. Well, Gayle, thank you so much for being here and
thank
sharing
you,
your
Diane.
wisdom.
Yeah, good to be here on the other side for a chance.
Yeah.
For a change, I should say. Yeah.
So good. Well, thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for being here with us. And, this is a great opportunity to look at, how are you being intentional about your life? What are you considering? All the things that we've been talking about as far as stepping into change and being able to be intentional and moving through chaos, right? I mean, we never know what is going to be popping up in, each moment or day or how that happens. But, when we can actually step into nature, right, we can look at things from a different perspective, we can ask ourselves different questions, then we can start really being that authentic person that we are and make the impact of the leaders that we are here to be. So until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now. Bye-bye.